and welcome to episode 4 of the Nerdkast podcast. It's great to have everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't already, go to our YouTube page. Please subscribe and like our videos and everything. That means a whole lot to us. Joining me tonight, as always, is Austin. Say hello, Austin.
That's me. Hello, Austin.
And making his triumphant return to episode 4 is Henry.
Hello.
And for his follow-up sequel appearance, Daniel is back. Say hi, Daniel.
Hey.
It's great to have you guys all here. Yeah, I can't wait to get into this. Today, our topic is going to be the first installment of the Harry Potter film franchise, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or the Philosopher's Stone, if you're from Britain and you want to be that kind of person, I guess. I don't know. So let's
I am not, but I will be.
Let's get right into it. First question I have, and let's go with Daniel to start this one. What do you think of the Dursleys' treatment of Harry, and how do you think it affected him in this film and beyond?
Let's see. Well, my opinion is going to be pretty much the same as everyone's. His treatment of Harry their treatment of Harry was awful. In the beginning, and it didn't get much better as the books went on. And Dudley grew up a little bit, but that was like all the way towards the end. As for how it affected him, you can kind of tell during the Christmas parts where he's like, "Hey, can I just stay here and not have to go back home?" Like, it definitely, like, he didn't really like, he didn't really like the Muggle world because of them. Like, he then, like, kind of tried to latch on to the Wizarding world, and tried to stay a part of that as much as he could, so he wouldn't have to go back home, go back to the Dursleys. But yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how he was in mortal danger for the overwhelming majority of this franchise, and he was like, "No, that's so much better. I'm good." Austin, I know you're, just recently reread the first book, as did I, actually, in the past 24 hours. Comment on that, and also, like, this plan of Dumbledore's to bring Harry and leave him with the Dursleys instead of, I don't even know who would have taken him, because shortly after all the events with Voldemort attacking his parents and killing his parents, Sirius ended up in Azkaban, and comment on that, if you will, like Dumbledore's kind of scheme.
Well, that's just it. I think that because of being in the Muggle world, that the Dursleys were essentially the only people who weren't going to be on Dumbledore's hit list, because everyone who had been close to Lily and James Potter were also a part of the Order of the Phoenix, the original Order of the Phoenix. So I sincerely do think that that was the only option Dumbledore had, because even Hagrid was associated with the first Order of the Phoenix. So yeah, I don't think there really was another option. And I guess as far as their treatment of Harry, from novel to film, at least, I think it's portrayed almost to perfection, and you get that sense in like very subtle little details. I never noticed when I was a kid that Harry's glasses are broken up until Hermione fixes them on the Hogwarts Express.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like his glasses have been broken for essentially probably most of his childhood. Mm-hmm. We don't know that for sure, unless, again, it's been a while since I read the first book. I don't think there ever really is like a time that's given. And like all of his clothes are like ragged, they're hand-me-downs. And you can tell he's not cared for. I mean, he lives in a cupboard under the stairs. And I like the subtle little hint when he's talking to the snake in the first movie, where he sees a sign that's bred in captivity, that snake. And it's just a subtle little like hint at like Harry's, just his background and where he came from, and just like how miserable his life really is.
Yeah, because at the same time, he at that point assumes that his parents died in a car crash and has absolutely no context as to the wizarding world that it even exists. He just assumes that he's just SOL for the first almost 11 years of his life at that point. Um, so I wonder, there are some subtle hints throughout, I think, the films, maybe not so much in this one, Henry, but like, how do you think that, took a toll on him? Because obviously he has, these qualities that are almost genetic or inherent in his personality, like just being brave and being smart and just having like this natural born talent to be able to do all the, wizarding spells. And he has that acumen. But do you think, his being treated that way for so long affects, some of his, you know, people skills, I guess you could say? What say you?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned both the natural talent and also the mistreatment of the Dursleys, because usually when it comes to victims of mistreatment, they usually statistically end up as bad people themselves. But what I find interesting about Harry, it's also in classic fairy tales like Cinderella, where you have the stepmother and the stepsisters that just treat her terribly, but she's always a kind person because I think she realizes early on that she shouldn't be treating people the way that they are. And same case with Harry, but also it makes me think of, even to compare it to another franchise like Luke Skywalker, where he has all these traits, and same as Princess Leia, where it's she has all these traits from her biological mother, as Luke does, where there's just this feeling of hope and this feeling of family. And you can even see it from Anakin when he was a young boy. But to go back to this franchise, even though we don't see much of either of his parents in this film, or even most of them for that matter, there's only what we've read of them in the books from past context. It sounds like they were very formidable, very family friendly people, that they were very kind and they were very pure of heart. And to see that kind of be passed down inherently down to Harry, I just think I love those kinds of setups where it's he is growing to be his mother's son, he's growing to be his father's son, and it's not just the kindness and pureness of his heart that was handed down. It was also his magical abilities, which, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys might know better than me, but is magical talents passed through genetically? Because I know that Hermione had Muggle parents, but did she have another relative that possibly could have passed it down?
Well, in the same way that athletic ability is transferred from generation to generation, I think it's in that same kind of vein. But go ahead, Austin. Did you have something to say on that?
Oh, I was going to say there are some characters known as squibs. I think it's squibs, and I think Filch is one. I think Filch might be one of them. No, but there's who's the woman in the beginning of the 5th movie? Mrs. Fig. She is actually a squib, where she was a Muggle born into a magical family. So I guess as far as inheritance, not necessarily.
Yeah. You're correct. You don't need anyone in your family line to have magical talent. You could just be born that way. Is my understanding from the books.
That's very interesting about Mrs. Fig, because she is name dropped in the books as the crazy cat lady that he goes to stay with whenever the Dursleys do anything not involving him, because they don't want him around. They don't want him taking him somewhere is the last option. It's funny that you bring up Mrs. Fig, because is she the one from, I guess it's Order of the Phoenix.
Order of the Phoenix.
That correct. Walks into the tunnel after the Dementors attack them.
Yes.
Wow, it's so crazy having gone back and just it's so fresh in my mind now, all those little things. And some of the subtext in the films that you might not kind of pick up on unless you did read the book is Harry wearing baggy hand-me-down clothes, but the reason they're so baggy is because obviously they're Dudleys, and they're just he literally just uses and gets given whatever scraps and trash that Dudley doesn't want anymore. And
right. I since we're on the topic real quick of just the Dursleys and their treatment, I don't want to dive too deep into fan theories, but there is a popular one because of Harry's connection to Voldemort being the unintentional Horcrux. Do you guys buy into that theory that their treatment was influenced by the presence of a Horcrux within Harry?
Oh, wow. I see what you're saying.
Did you never know that theory?
I have never heard of that. It makes some sense. The only thing I would say probably not is because not everybody acted like that towards him. I mean, that would have influenced, you would have thought, everybody he would have engaged with throughout his life, like especially Ron and Hermione come to mind. That's the only reason I don't necessarily ship that. I think two things. One, Petunia Dursley is super sour and just has like this lifelong hatred for her sister because she was basically a squib in all things, I would assume, because obviously Lily got her letter, Petunia did not. And so she just like hated her sister and hated James and by extension Harry. And the other thing is,
I believe.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Spencer.
Yep,
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
You're fine. Go ahead.
Just a correction. I think no, Lily Potter is a mudblood because she was born into a non-magical family.
I could never remember that. Yeah, no, because like when, at least in the context of this film, because this is one of the ones that obviously we've had for the longest, so I almost know like every line, oddly enough, because I've seen it so many times. Like, she doesn't really elaborate on like, oh, my mom and dad were witches and wizards, but they were so proud of her when she got it. And I never put that together. It probably is explicitly said in the books that she was a mudblood.
There is a line. It's when they're in the shack on the island, where she's like, "My mother and I were so proud we had a witch in the family."
I guess, yeah, you could read it into it that way. Good call. Good call. The other thing I was going to say is like, when you read the books, and it's interesting because you watch the movie and the three Dursleys, and I guess you could add Marge to that. The people who played them did them so well that they're almost like, they suck, but they're kind of likable in some ways. Like they're just kind of like goofy and almost like I wouldn't want to live with them or be friends with them, but they are they have that a little bit of charm just in general. Just that I found the performances kind of charming in certain ways just because of what they were going for. But in the book especially, and when you actually look at the actions of Vernon specifically, like he's kind of a sociopath. Like when you think about it, like he's never happy about anything. He's like just a dick to Harry. Like he doesn't like, and it just never changes. I mean, we're not talking about all the movies right now, but like he like shakes his hand at the end of Deathly Hallows when they're having to flee for their lives, and he's just like, well, good luck, I guess. Like it's just, it kind of boggles the mind that, you know, I hear people talk about like, oh, Harry's just this trust fund kid because he had all this money and stuff. It's like, yeah, but he was like emotionally like tortured and abused for close to 11 years. Like those are the formative years of your life. Most people going through that would have some serious psychological disorder. Hell, being like living in a cupboard or like a cupboard under the stairs with spiders. Like they talk in the book about like spiders are just always there and he just doesn't have a problem with them because they're just always there. He just picks them off his sock like it's no big deal.
Well, I think you just actually hit on exactly why I think like as the books continue, and I won't dive too far into those since we're only talking about the Sorcerer's Stone, but I think that is exactly why so many people rally about him, because I think it was by the time like Order of the Phoenix came around, it's like you have all these people that are just like following Harry, or even like how quickly like Ron and Hermione would round about him, or even in this movie specifically, like where he's walking, I remember there was the scene where Ron's complaining about Hermione being like Leviosa, not Leviosa. And like as they're doing that scene, like there's a huge group of people, not just like the misfits like Neville and Ron, but like also like some of the other kids. So like I remember the one kid who grew up to be in How to Get Away with Murder is like a kid in that movie, and he's one of like those core friends that just aren't as important to the plot, but he's still there. And I think the reason why is just because of how he was always kind of like this symbol of hope to all of them. It's like they of course only knew about his parents being murdered by Voldemort and him being the only one who lived from, you know, the wrath of he who must not be named. But even moving forward though, just the amount of just confrontations and problems that he faces, like one after another, and that he just keeps his head high and he just keeps moving forward and keeps treating people with kindness and respect. It's like those are the kind of heroes that, like, I feel like we don't only need in our world, but they also need it in their world. And, you know, it was one of the things I was thinking of when I first saw this movie was all those kids were in the same boat Harry was to a degree. Like, some of them had like parents like the Weasleys, where it's like this generation and generation of everyone being into this world of witchcraft and wizardry. But a lot of them, like Hermione, probably just came from no magical parents at all, and they just get involved in this world. And it shows, because Hermione did, from what it looked like, didn't have any friends in this movie other than Neville, Ron, and Harry. So I think that's why, like, the character is so well written, and he's really great to look up to.
And two final points I'll make before we move on to the next question is, like, one, it's interesting on like a kind of like a macro level how, you know, Voldemort goes away obviously when he kills Harry's parents. And then 10 years later is when we really pick up the events of Sorcerer's Stone and everything. But for all these kids' parents who Harry's going into Hogwarts with, there's a real sense of, you know, not the ones who are like Muggle-born, like Hermione, and I'd even maybe say Seamus to a certain extent because he was half and half. But there's like this generational trauma. Like it's almost like a post-war, like a post-World War II, like a reconstruction, because like the wizarding world was like just completely devastated by the 10 or so years of Voldemort's tyranny. Like so it's interesting how that generational trauma is kind of like bestowed upon these kids. I mean, Neville pops to mind especially, and we can talk a little bit more about this later, but like obviously Neville, his parents were tortured and murdered, and that's one interesting point. The other one I would say is, like, you know, I think it does, like Henry was kind of talking about, it does speak to the strength of Harry as a character, because he goes through those 10 years of psychological trauma and abuse to be so nice to everybody he meets. The only people he really butts head with in this film are people who are outright, like, you know, D-bags to other people, like Malfoy and the Dursleys. And, you know, Snape is very misunderstood, obviously, what his intentions are throughout all the films, but this is his intro to him, and he's just like, why are you mean to everybody? Like, this just doesn't make sense. And so, like, he has a legitimate beef with him, just almost based solely off of personality, because Harry wants to be nice and everything. So any final comments? Or
Well, I'm actually so glad you just brought that up, because the scene where Draco's first introduced, and we all knew somebody like Draco. I believe Sorcerer's Stone is grade 6, so like enter junior high. And
yeah, 11. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like those years, like when you first get into middle school, where people are like turning on one another, like lifelong friends, like, you know, becoming enemies and things like that. Now, granted, he didn't know anybody at Hogwarts previously, so he didn't grow up with them. But like to see like some of the ones who like all knew each other, like already trying to make like this us and them concept, and right off the bat, as soon as he steps foot in Hogwarts, like Draco already trying to hone in on the legacy that is the boy who lived, and Harry just turning him down flat, saying, I can decide for myself, and not wanting to be in Slytherin because of Draco Malfoy. When I thought it was because he knew that Voldemort was a Slytherin, but no, it was completely because he saw Draco. He was like, I don't want to be involved in that. And just people just rallied behind him. It was like, and I think that's so important to have those key moments in any kind of origin film about this iconic hero, because even before the movie came out, there were the 3 books, and everybody knew this guy was already iconic.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's yeah. Did you have something to say, Daniel?
No.
Okay, perfect. All right, moving right along. I hope this is a really fun one. I hope. What are your 2 favorite locations or settings introduced in this film, and why? And let's start with Austin for this one.
This is such a difficult question to answer, because again, nostalgia is going to play a huge factor in this answer. I could really only think of one as like just a generalization, and it's Hogwarts. And the reason being, again, I'm about to get nostalgic, is that I remember playing the Sorcerer's Stone video game on PC and just being my own. I mean, obviously I'm Harry, but like also being my own avatar in that world and kind of living day to day, learning new spells and like going on the adventure that is the Sorcerer's Stone.
Mm-hmm.
I just love the idea of exploring the castle that is Hogwarts. And even so, in the Chamber of Secrets video game that I played on GameCube, you get a little more in depth with the castle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I always just want to be at Hogwarts. Has anyone ever been to like the Wizarding World down in was it Orlando?
Yep.
Have you been there? How is it?
It's fantastic. Like I most places like that, and Disney World notwithstanding, they could, I guess, on the surface look kind of gimmicky a little bit, but specifically the Hogwarts Castle ride that kind of goes through all the different like settings and stuff. You walk through the line and like it's one of the best queue lines I think that I've ever been in, at least, because every like new turn you go around, it's like, here's the greenhouse where they were with Professor Sprout, and here's the library, and here's like, it's just like it's pretty breathtaking. And obviously Hogsmeade and kind of Diagon Alley, how they kind of did that up a little bit. I mean, it's pretty awesome. Just my opinion.
That's why I can't really narrow down specifics of like my favorite places or my favorite scenes in the movie, simply because it's all just great. And I think that's what's so perfect about the movie is just that you fall in love with the wizarding world that's presented to you. And it's just like, I want to go there. There's a reason everybody wanted their Hogwarts acceptance letter when they were 11s, because they wanted to go there. So
yeah, now I'm stuck waiting on a wizard to knock on my door when I turn 40. So I'll let you know. Stay posted.
I know you wanted 2 answers, but I can really only give you 1, just because I want to go to Hogwarts.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Henry, what do you think about that? 2 settings, 1 setting, all the settings?
Well, I mean, I definitely think we'll all agree with Hogwarts for sure, especially when they first pull up and John Williams' theme of the da-da-da-da-da, like that's when you were like, I think it's so important in these origin films of these big cinematic universes where you have world building, and there were so many sets. Like just now I was thinking like between, I think I have to go with Diagon Alley because that's like our first real step into the wizarding world. And aside from Hogwarts, which is, of course, is where they all go to school, we see really the only other places we see other than like out in the woods and the forest and stuff is Diagon Alley, which I think is just amazing and magical. And you see all these different shops that each thing is something different. And I love Ollivander's mainly because like you put John Hurt on screen, it'll always take me back to the Elephant Man. Like I just think he's was such a brilliant actor. But also I love, and this sounds weird, but it's the final scene in the movie where the Hogwarts Express is leaving the train station. That to me was just, and I think the music had a great deal to do with it too, where he's having his final moments with Hagrid and just how Hagrid's just been there for him the whole movie. Mm-hmm. For some reason, that train station is always going to be my favorite place because it's like taking Willy Wonka's boat into this completely different reality. That's the gateway between our world and their world. It's just amazing. And I wish if there's a Hogwarts Express ride, I would love to ride it because I love that train so much.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That scene when they're in the boats with Hagrid all the first years, and they start with like a downward angle shot, and they just pan up, and you see the castle for the first time. It's so good, and it's just like that's one of easily my favorite scenes, top 5 probably in the entire series, just from like a visual standpoint.
It's so iconic enough that if you buy the Blu-rays, the box set, like that is the scene you get on the front cover.
I literally have that on my shelf. You were absolutely right. That's excellent.
Yeah, I have it on mine too.
Daniel, what are your favorite locations, and why is it the girls' lavatory?
Repeat that.
What are your 2 favorite?
Heard you.
Yeah, no. You like the girls' lavatory that smells like mountain drool, or what are some of your favorite spots?
See, it's not that one. But no, all right. So I was gonna say when you first meet Hogwarts, like that view of Hogwarts. Everyone else already said it. so yes, the outside view of Hogwarts when you first meet it, that like also like the big aerial like around the castle view. I loved that. However, I'm gonna speak specifically though. The main hall for me because it had the floating candles, and then like if you look up when there's like a storm going on, you look up, the entire ceiling is see through. I mean, how cool is that?
The floating pumpkins for Halloween. Yeah,
and they themed it too.
The fact that like he just claps his hands and just food.
I wish that could be my life.
Oh yeah,
food.
We live in America. It's basically what we have.
Oh yeah, I mean, you have to put credit card in between. And there you go.
Welcome to Dumbledore's. Can I take your order?
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, but yeah. So there's that, and so the other one was honestly the Forbidden Forest, just because because when you're reading the book the first time and you're going through all this stuff, like everyone's like, "Woo, the Forbidden Forest," and then you finally end up going in there, and and at first you're like, "Wow, this is kind of creepy," and then it really was. It was terrifying, especially like with Voldemort standing over the unicorn, and you're just like,
it was like centaurs appear, and in the book they're like, "Aren't there werewolves in here?" Like, there's just so many things that you're just like, "Oh yeah, they're in there. Don't go off the path. Don't follow the lights."
Follow the spiders.
But this just all adds to like just reflecting on like all these locations that were introduced in this movie, like with any like origin or like chapter one in any big like expansive universe. It's just crazy to think like this film as well as the entire franchise could have flopped if they didn't knock it out of the park on this brand new world. And granted, that was at a time where I think franchises were probably at their best in terms of being iconic, because I think there's so many franchises out now and so much material, it's so hard to keep up. But this movie specifically, just I think in terms of world building, really took us on a ride, which is the goal of the movie. But sometimes I feel like with franchises just don't do it. But this one not only did it, but I think it possibly did it the best, second maybe to only Fellowship of the Ring, which came out that same year.
Well, I think that'll be a continuing theme throughout this episode, in my opinion, is that not only did this do it really well, but like you said, in the vein of like a New Hope or the Fellowship of the Ring, it's the first time you see this world. And to be fair, I mean, there are similar films that have come out since or before and everything, but you really never saw anything like this specifically before that. I mean, there are elements that are shared with other things, I think, but I think that'll be just how well it was executed in mine and probably your guys' opinion. I think as we go along the episode, that'll be a theme. Couple more settings I want to just throw out, and actually kind of in the vein of Daniel, some specific ones. First off, mentioning the Forbidden Forest, that's a fantastic call, because what were the two things Dumbledore said like when they first show up? It's do not go into the Forbidden Forest, you will die. Don't go to the third floor corridor, you will die. Like, those are the two things you're not supposed to do. So by the time they're in detention and they're going into the Forbidden Forest, and Phil's just like giggling and shit because he just talked about how, they used to hang kids by their wrists or by their thumbs, in the dungeons. And oh man, that would have been nice to do tonight or something like that. But no, go in the forest. That's also equally terrifying. So the whole like atmosphere of all that I thought was fantastic. But a couple that weren't mentioned that I think I'd just touch on real quick is, first off, platform 9 3/4 right here, and the train. I'll kind of loop them into one. I thought just it's a train. It's the same as everything else, but just kind of like who you get introduced to on the train, some of the things that happen there, like one of the first spells that he witnesses, obviously fixing his glasses that had been broken. There's just a lot of charm to the train that I really like. It kind of takes me back to like an older age, I guess you could say. But the other, I guess, three that I really wanted to touch on real quick were the Quidditch pitch. I thought was fantastic. I don't know exactly what I was imagining when I read it as, an 8 or 9-year-old, but that was it was so nice to have that visualized, because Quidditch can be kind of a complicated thing to explain. But I thought just the what do you want to say? Like the set design and everything was so good for that. And then the other two are, I think Henry touched on it, Ollivanders. I thought was really cool to see what that looked like. Actually, I have two more on top of that. I'm sorry. The Leaky Cauldron, I thought was really cool because it's like just this literal, like, it looks like meth was created here. They're just walking through this nice London street, and he's just like, oh yeah, we're going in this one. And it's basically the gateway to Diagon Alley. So that's kind of cool. And the final one I'll bring up is the underground of the Gringotts Bank. I thought was really cool how they designed that, and like all these vaults and stuff. And, I will try not to constantly reference the books, but some of the things they talk about in there, like they're talking, I don't know if they mentioned it in the movie, and it kind of is a bit of I get not a plot hole per se, but like, Hagrid gets his dragon and he's like, what has Hagrid always wanted? A dragon. And it's like, I don't know if it's actually said in the movie that that's what he really wants prior to that conversation. But in the book, it actually, he talks about like, yeah, I've always wanted a dragon. There's actually probably some dragons in Gringotts. And, when they're on that ride, he's like looking around trying to see them and stuff. And so there's just a lot of cool magic, I think, involved in that as well. But does anybody
Sorry, I'm always cutting you off short.
No, you're fine. So sorry. Feel free.
There is a deleted scene. I just watched it recently, again on the Blu-ray. I don't remember the location of it, but there is a deleted scene where Hagrid does specifically say that he's like always wanted a dragon. So it is kind of funny how that
theatrical cut would be my guess.
No, it did not. And that's what I was just about to say, that it's funny how there is a scene that did make the cut where Harry says, I don't think it's like the day I met him or anything, but it's like when Hagrid and I first met, all he ever talked about was wanting a dragon. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of interesting how at least that line was cut and then brought back later. So I kind of thought the whole dragon sequence was real. I don't know if it was necessary in the film, in like the final cut, but it does cut a good chunk out of the film, or at least in the book. Cuts out a good chunk of the book with Norbert and the dragon.
It does. You're absolutely right. With it being so fresh in my mind, it's one of those things that, and it's not a topic of, we could go down a really long rabbit hole about nitpicking what specific parts of the book that we would have liked to see in the film. But I think overall, I kind of like what they kept and what they decided not to, because it would have been cool to see some of the stuff like you were mentioning with like the extended stuff with Norbert, sorry. And just like how, Hagrid goes with him to Diagon Alley, and then he actually goes home for like another month or 2 months before he actually goes to platform 9 3/4. But there's stuff like that like, I'm just happy they just kept it rolling, kept it interesting. Once they left that little shack on the island, they didn't really need to go back to the Dursleys. I was content and fine with that. But this wasn't on the pre-production notes, but I want to throw you guys a curveball real quick, and I'm going to start with Henry real quick on this one. Talk about the relationship between Harry and Hagrid, because I think, as you take the Dursleys' little prelude out of the movie, his relationship with Hagrid really undercuts it's kind of the foundation of a lot of things. And it sort of bookends the film as well, as far as the wizarding part is concerned. Like Hagrid picks him up really at the beginning of the film too, now that I think about it, because he drops him off for the first time at the Dursleys. But speak to their relationship and what you thought of it.
I'm so glad you brought up Hagrid, because if you want to talk about just his character alone, like not just in the book, but like the actor that played him, if you want to talk just the pure illusion, like it's not just, I'm not seeing this specific actor I've seen in other movies playing a character. I am seeing the Rubeus Hagrid just right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And just his optimism and just how much he cares for Harry, even though he wasn't around for the 10, 11 years it was that he was growing up. Like, just even when he was a boy, when he first drops him off, and like you can see that he like physically, like, and emotionally cares about this kid. You know, it's been a while since I've read the book, so I can't remember if he was close with James and Lily Potter. But just how much he cares for the boy, I just think I'm so glad that J.K. Rowling wrote it that way and that they portray that in the film. And also, as the films go on, just how their relationship develops, and that even though like his relationship with certain other characters or sometimes in and out, like I know even him and Ron butt heads at sometimes, but like Hagrid has always been there. He's always been consistently in Harry's corner. And that when he shows up, it's the way that I had saw it. And I'm so sorry that I'm about to compare this to Star Wars again, but it makes me think of Ben Kenobi, where it's like, here's this guy that's in a way just been watching over you your whole life, even though you didn't know. And where I think that Hagrid, though, where he's a little different, is that he was our gateway into this world. He was wearing the Willy Wonka top hat with the cane, who basically somersaulted out and was like, let me take you on this adventure. And he introduces Harry into this world. And ever since this is just the personal opinion, I think that ever since Hagrid brought him through the Leaky Cauldron into Diagon Alley, I think Hagrid felt a personal responsibility for Harry until he finally graduated from Hogwarts. I feel like he took it on himself to always watch after him, even long after he didn't need him. Because as we know, like, Harry becomes way more powerful than most wizards. I think even Ron pointed at it at the last film, where he's like, we're basically invincible at this point. But Hagrid still just felt that responsibility for him. And I love the way his character was written.
Yeah, and before I toss it to Daniel, it's so interesting because what starts out is just like, and who knows, I don't know how much it's elaborated on how much he was a part of the Order and friends with James and Lily and all that kind of stuff. But what starts is almost just he has this undying loyalty to Dumbledore because Dumbledore had his back through the expulsion and all that kind of stuff. And what started as just like a messenger type deal where he's like, go get this child, bring him to me now. He's, what's great about this character is like, he's a very physically imposing character and he can do magic. I mean, he had his wand snap, but he can do magic. And he's, a different author or something like that might have written this character as more of like a gruff, grim, brooding type character, but he's like, he loves animals. He takes like a lot of pride in taking care of Hogwarts ground. Like you see him like carrying the Christmas tree into the Great Hall when it's Christmas time. And he's just such an empath. Like when he drops Harry off and he's like crying because he's just, he loves people and he loves, he loves the students in the school. And, Daniel, take it away. Not a great segue, but go for it.
It can't be worse than the ones that I've gifted to you. But yeah, so the relationship between Harry and Hagrid. So Harry was in this Harry was in like the Dursley hell for the longest time. And then then Hagrid, comes riding in on a flying motorcycle of all things to come and rescue him.
Which was given to him by Sirius Black, I'll point out.
Yes. Yeah. And it so he comes in, rescues Harry, and that's what Hagrid starts off as to Harry. He starts off as this like savior type, and it gets to the point where Hagrid is slowly becoming the father that Harry never really had in the Dursleys. Like he didn't really have good parental figures in the Dursleys, and then here comes Hagrid, and now he has something like that.
Well, and even if he's not necessarily, because I would attribute somebody like, say, Sirius or Dumbledore more as like maybe a father figure, but certainly a big brother figure. Most definitely. I had something else to say, and I'm going to try and remember it while Austin goes.
Well, I was going to touch on what you just said. Like Hagrid really is kind of the first friend that Harry ever really had. Not necessarily like a big brother or a father figure, but yeah, like he is the first one to really accept Harry for who he is and help him come to the realization for who he is. Which brings up, Henry, you kind of stole the words out of my mouth, where Hagrid really is kind of our segue into the wizarding world, ours as in the viewer, where Harry is just put in this situation and kind of serves as like our avatar, where we know nothing about this world, just like the main protagonist of this entire series does. So again, Christopher Columbus just executed it perfectly, the relationship between Harry and Hagrid. And if that didn't work, then again, the entire franchise might not have worked. So Hagrid was able to assist Harry into the transition of this new life, this new world that he's never known, while simultaneously doing it for us as well. So, and I think it's done to perfection.
Really speaks to not only the writing, but the direction, the casting. I mean, all these things. It's almost, I don't want to say lightning in a bottle because there's so many good elements throughout the franchise. But for this film specifically, you're right. I mean, you have convinced me, Henry. Hagrid is part Wonka.
He's the BFG.
Come with me and do in a world of charms and divination. All right, so moving right along, and this is another kind of relationship, I guess you could say, that's more of in the background, because obviously there is the twist at the very end. Spoiler alert for a movie that's 20 years old, but, Quirrell's actually the guy who's, the bad guy.
What?
News to me, bro. Do you think the whole Snape versus Quirrell sort of misdirection, do you think it was executed well? All the hints that they kind of drop throughout, both in the book, but specifically in the movie. Daniel, how did you like that switcheroo?
All right, so yeah, when I was reading it the first time, granted, I was like, 8 at the time. So yeah, I was definitely misdirected. I thought that Snape was going to be like in cahoots with Voldemort. I never would have pictured Quirrell back then. But the hints are all throughout the book, like Quirrell muttering to himself. In the movie, there's actually several points where like you can clearly tell. You can tell pretty clearly, but you gotta know what you're looking for, of course. But
the frame of the Quidditch game where like the shot is of Snape sitting there talking, but if you look to the right, he's over his shoulder doing the same exact thing and stuff like that, and they're getting bumped by Hermione. But I don't want to steal
which breaks the concentration. Yeah.
Did you want to touch on anything else before I toss it, or?
I wanted to call Quirrell an asshat, but
I think that would be justified.
Okay. Yeah.
Sustained. Austin, pick it up.
Yeah, that was right on the money. It's really amazing how every medium of this movie or book, whatever you want to say in particular, really drives home the fact that, Snape is meant to be perceived as the bad guy. And then there's the big plot twist at the end that, no, it was Quirrell. And what I really like is that how those kind of moments that Daniel touched on, there are those, if you blink, you miss it. You don't see those scenes as well as you do when you're younger. And then when you really start analyzing those shots, like you said, at the Quidditch match, where you can see, Quirrell have his concentration and I think have his hands kind of like cupped together like that, where at the end of the movie, he says, if Snape hadn't broken my counter curse and like broken my concentration, I would have succeeded in throwing you off your broom. So you get the sense that Snape, there's more to this character. There's a reason he's being such like a terrible person to Henry. And I'm sorry, Harry. Snape hates you, dude.
Because I like Bruce Willis.
He never let Nakatomi Plaza down.
You get a sense that like there's something more to this story, and obviously in the books and films that precede this, they're there.
Definitely, and it's funny how like Hermione even says like, I was watching Snape. He was not blinking. He was staring right at him. And then, of course, you go back to the frame and he's staring right at him the whole time. I mean, and it's not quite the same level of like, what a twist is like the end of Sixth Sense for the first time or something like that. But
and what's really funny, there's just like a little quick comparison to the books that I believe in the same scene that takes place in the Leaky Cauldron. I don't know if this is a continuity thing or not, or maybe there's a timeline where Voldemort does attach his spirit to Quirrell. But I believe in the book, I wish I had it right here next to me. Quirrell actually does shake Harry's hand. And so I thought that was just an interesting little thing where it's just like, okay, so like, what's our timeline when Voldemort actually attaches himself to
Consult the
Quirrell?
Book of Elements.
I was going to say, Henry, I was going to bring up the fact that he was in the Leaky Cauldron as another kind of nod to all that. But what to say you about this relationship, and how did it land for you?
I think Snape was definitely one of the best written characters in Harry Potter. He's like, when I think of figures kind of like Kaiba from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z, like where you have these guys where you think you have them figured, but you never really do. And they just keep amazing you. But funny enough, I'm going to detour just for 1 second because we were talking about Quirrell and like the kind of thing between Snape and Quirrell.
He does shake his hand. Plot hole.
Oh.
Well
is it
done.
a plot hole, or is all I'm saying is that, like, because in the movie he refuses to shake his hand, in the book he shakes his hand, so it's just an interesting.
It might have been
change.
a fixed plot hole once they got to the movie, because you're absolutely right. He does the whole like, "Not that you need it" kind of thing, and pulls his hand back.
But why would Snape? I remember this the same with the invisibility cloak, where Harry approaches them and like Snape is kind of like, "You don't want me as your enemy." Like, but what I'm kind of confused about is, so as we know in the later books and movies, that like Snape is this double agent for Voldemort. What was he trying to accomplish in that moment?
Well, he didn't trust him. He was trying to figure out why he wanted the Sorcerer's Stone. I don't think Snape had any context.
So it had nothing to do with Voldemort or anything like that.
Not to my knowledge, because I think if he had known that, it would have made his double agent, persona later on in the films much more difficult. Had Voldemort known that he knew that it was Voldemort, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it would have been a lot harder to be like, well, I was trying to stop you, but I didn't know. It could get very into the weeds real quick. But that was my take on it, at least. I think it's kind of funny how again, I keep going back to the books and stuff, but it's like in the movie, you don't really get a sense of like why Quirrell did what he did, why he subjected himself to this kind of body torture, almost like body horror type thing.
I'm sorry.
But I was going to just say, and then I'll let you go. In the books, it's actually expressly said that, he had a lot of, what's the word? He aspired to like have a lot of power, and he was very, like that was more of his mindset. So it sounds almost like Voldemort's spirit had jumped to a couple different people, but then it just sort of latched itself onto him. And, of course, because he was a Hogwarts professor and things like that, it was just like the natural place to be, because he was, being a Hogwarts professor has a certain level of clout and influence. So it's kind of like the perfect host for Voldemort to kind of occupy. But go ahead, Henry. What did you want to say?
No, that's all good. I was just thinking, like, I've always taken Quirrell to kind of be like someone who just didn't want to be alone. He even touched in the line where he was like, Snape thinks I'm alone, but I'm never alone. And I think it's just like when you join a cult, because the Death Eaters were basically a cult, and I might be mistaken, but I read online somewhere that in like Goblet of Fire, when we first see what the Death Eaters actually are, which I believe Quirrell was technically a Death Eater, when they're walking through the camp, it almost looks like the Ku Klux Klan during the Civil Rights Movement, where they're like walking in and they look just terrifying. Like, these people, just like they're designed to look evil, they are evil. And when you see that, like, and it brings you back to the question, like, why do people do bad things? I think one of the most common themes is just people feeling alone and wanting to be a part of something where, like, you feel like these people have your back and stuff. And that's always been my takeaway of Quirrell, because whereas, like, this is our first step into the wizarding world, like, really our first take of a villain in Harry Potter is Quirrell, because Voldemort's there, but aside from the terrifying introduction that Hagrid gives him at the Leaky Cauldron, I believe it is, which still haunts me to this day. I don't think I've ever seen a more terrifying introduction to a villain in a movie than when they first introduced Voldemort. As a child, that kept me up for years. Like
You're talking about at the end of the film, right? When he
No,
takes off the turban, or
when they're in the cauldron and Hagrid tells Harry the truth about his parents,
I see. Yep.
cloaked Voldemort, like you don't know what he looks like. And I remember as a kid just like theorizing, like, what does Voldemort look like? You know, he's the big bad dude in this big universe, because everybody was talking about Harry Potter at the time. And when they released a movie, I didn't see him in the trailer or anything. I was like, is Voldemort just not going to be a part of it? But sure enough, when Hagrid sits down with him and says, hey, like, this is what happened, and it cuts to that clip of him just cloaked walking through the streets. And I think that was the most scary thing in the world, is just like him just easily walking into this house and murdering them, like right in their living room, like right where they live. It's just, I mean, that anyways.
I thought it was very effective as well. Yeah. And what's, like, there's going to be like 1,000,001 points in this episode where I'm like, oh, and in the book. But what was interesting is that piece of exposition in the book was just pretty much told by Hagrid when they're all sitting at that shack on the island. He does all the stuff with, like, he gives Dudley the pigtail and all this kind of stuff. But in mixed with all that, he tells the exposition there, and then they actually spend the night before they head out and go to London and Diagon Alley and stuff. But I thought that was probably a smarter place to put it in the movies, because, at that point, Harry had been like a little more introduced to things. He got all his supplies. He went to Gringotts, he went to Ollivanders, and then they're just sitting in the leaky cauldron. It's dark and kind of brooding and everything. I think that, like you said, the tone and everything, it's segued into it really well. Whereas if they had done it exactly like in the book, it would have been just like almost what felt like a prolonged exposition dump that just felt like out of place. So those are just my thoughts. But did
It would have
anybody
been
else?
too much information, I think, at one time for a viewer.
Because he does come in and he starts talking about, like, well, you're a wizard and you're going to Hogwarts. Here's your letter. Dumbledore's the headmaster. Oh, you didn't know about your parents. Your parents didn't die in a car crash. Like, there was a ton of exposition just being said there.
I think it might have been better executed in the movie for that reason alone, because when Hagrid first shows up, it's that Hobbit moment where you're like, I'm going on an adventure.
Hobbits are going to, or taking the Hobbits to Isengard.
Exactly. And then, like, when you start, like, getting to it, I feel like in the book where, like, if he tells him about his parents right there, then there's a little bit of reason, like, wait a minute, like, there's this whole wizarding world, and my parents were killed because of it. And, he might have had a little, even though life was terrible with the Dursleys, he might have had a little bit of objection to going into this new world, but instead they did this other thing where they showed us this world and made us super excited. And then, of course, when Voldemort's finally, like, talked about for the first time, like 45 minutes or so in the movie, it's like, okay, this is the plot device that's going to carry us through. And I think it's something else that's amazing about that scene and why it's so iconic. When they first do that flashback of Voldemort, is like, I mean, that scene is terrifying, but this little kid, this sixth grader, somehow is going to overcome that fear and, 7 years later, defeat that guy. Like, it sets the journey up perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was very well executed in my opinion. But yeah, moving on. This is hopefully, I wanted to leave this question a little more open-ended because there's just so many points you could hit home about this. So I didn't want to restrict us to one. Let's see. I think if I'm not mistaken, this one goes to Austin first. And the question is, what are your opinions regarding the big three in this film? Obviously, meaning Harry, Ron, Hermione. I'll let you just kind of meander with your thoughts on this one because there's just so much to talk about. I didn't want to pinpoint it on like one specific thing. So what are your thoughts on the big three?
Sure. So individually, I know I've already mentioned Harry once being as kind of like the viewer or the reader's avatar into this world. And you get a sense that, Ron comes from this like huge family that knows all about the wizarding world. And like Hermione comes from like just this whole wealth of knowledge already that was predisposed to her before her first year at Hogwarts. So like, that's what really contributes to Harry being the underdog. And funny enough, like Harry does use magic, yes, but like he never casts a spell once, at least in the movies. I'm not sure about the book anymore, but it's interesting to see that he really is kind of, well, he's not overshadowed necessarily. That's not the right term I'm looking for. I don't know what the correct word I'm looking for is, but he is kind of like outmatched compared to the other two as far as like what they've already been given to work with.
Well, he's very much in the like beginning phase of his hero's journey. He's certainly not OP whatsoever, which is, I think, makes him a much more interesting character, having to just be at like kind of level 1, and then we kind of start the ranking process.
I do like, there are moments in the movie at least where, you know, you really get the sense of just how great of a wizard Harry will become. He's already kind of adjusted to using magic. He can fly exceptionally well. He's great at Quidditch. Yeah, he's great at Quidditch. And before I lose my train of thought on Harry, I think Daniel Radcliffe like is the perfect rendition of Harry. Just like, if you even look at the front cover of the book, you know, that is Daniel Radcliffe. And you look at Daniel Radcliffe, even today, you're like, that's Harry Potter. Like, they're just so synonymous with each other. And that's what I love. And that's what I love about all three of them. Actually, it's just, I know like they tried to make Hermione a little more like attractive in at least the movies, because I know that like she's meant to be this kind of like nerdy outcast, like doesn't really care about her appearance, like bookworm character that honestly like no one really connects with or really even likes, at least until like halfway through both the book and the movie. I said it in our previous episode, so I'll touch on it briefly. I do think Ron and Rupert Grint are kind of the like, they really steal the spotlight in certain scenes. And I know we're going to talk about the chess game at some point tonight, so I'll leave that for then. But like, Ron really does take command of this movie from time to time. And I think they work together really well as a unit. You watch their screen tests and it's just like, they already have this chemistry and they come off as just kids like having fun. And it's a hangout movie. You're just going through like their day-to-day life. And then like for the last half hour, it's like, okay, now we actually have like a villain introduced. We have tension to get to. But until then, it's just like kids learning about their new way of life.
Yeah, the second 2 acts, like the act 2 and 3 of the film, really hangs on the balance of their chemistry and how well they work together. If they don't work, the film doesn't work in so many ways. And I would agree, like damn near perfect casting and, you know, direction, all the above was, in my opinion, it worked very well. Henry, what do you say?
Well, I'm so glad that Austin just mentioned the chess game, because I agree 100% that Rupert Grint, his acting in this movie, I think, is overshadowed so much. There's one line specifically where they're playing the game of chess and he organizes the whole thing, and then he tells Harry his plan. I'm gonna move here, and then the queen's gonna kill me, and then, well, figuratively speaking, and then you're gonna have to go forward on your own. And what I think is so amazing about that is we see this whole movie, this arc of this kid who's lost so much and he's been through hell on earth. And in this moment, Ron, who's been by his side ever since the moment they got on the train, is like, I'm going to sacrifice myself for you so that you can move forward. I'm going to give up myself. And of course, we know he lives, like, you know, it's no spoiler, but in that moment, I don't think Ron knew he was going to die. And Rupert Grint could have not sold it at all. Like, because, you know, there's something about these kids that's like, sometimes when you watch kids acting, and I never like picking on kid actors because it's their first movies and everything, but they sell their parts. They become these characters. And it was specifically that moment in this movie that was like, that's friendship right there. And then Hermione touches on it a little bit after, where she's talking about like friendship and bravery and Harry, do be careful. But I think that Rupert Grint and like even a character like Neville Longbottom, which, you know, he comes into play later, those kind of represent like the Samwise Gamgees of these movies, that they're always there, they're always true, and they don't necessarily have anything to gain other than their consistent loyalty and friendship to their other friends. And I think it goes without saying that, like, I mean, it's already been said that Daniel Radcliffe was absolutely perfect as Harry Potter. And I think that Emma Watson, she's perfect as Hermione, a little bit too perfect as Hermione, because every movie she has done since has been Hermione. Like, whether it's Noah, her portrayal of Belle from Beauty and the Beast, which I don't even want to talk about.
Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Yeah, like Perks of Being a Wallflower. Noah, which still is a movie that confuses me. But like every time I see her, it's like, you're still Hermione Granger. And I don't know if she could ever like break out of it. So I think she just played it too well. But at the same time, though, it's like for this franchise, it just goes back into the escapism. Like, she is Hermione Granger. Harry Potter is Daniel Radcliffe, or reverse that. Rupert Grint is Ron Weasley.
Yeah, there's a little Easter egg. I wanted to bring it up in last episode, but just as a little like fun bit of information, there is an incredible scene of the movie CBGB, which I think we all know CBGB is like a world-renowned like punk rock venue, which has been since shut down. I believe it's been since shut down. And
they're trying to bring it back at one point or something.
Are they?
At some point, I don't know.
I almost said Ron Weasley, but there's a scene where Rupert Grint is in the Dead Boys, which is a band that is auditioning, and Alan Rickman is I can't remember his name. I can't remember the owner's name, but he's essentially auditioning the band, and it's just really entertaining to watch Rupert Grint, the guy you associate as Ron Weasley, acting like this like really drugged up like punk rocker. It's an entertaining scene. It really is.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I think like you were talking about last week, you know, when you read the books or just in general, they did their parts so well that when you think of the characters, you don't think of them in the books. You think of the actors who played them. Like, they're that good at their portrayals were that good. But Daniel, what say you about the big three? What were your impressions?
So I actually want to start this part with a little small bit of information. You see, so when they were being when each of them was being cast for their parts, they originally Rowling didn't want them because they were too attractive. I mean, yeah, of course, they were kids at the time, and she's like, they look too good. Right. But eventually, you know, she came around, and those three ended up being in their respective roles. And I thought that was funny, like, because Rowling wanted, you know, the big three to be nerdier. Like, you know, they wanted it to be like the nerd group, and like even then, you could already see, well, they don't look like the nerd group, you know, and so at the same time though, they did amazing. They were perfect for their roles. Yeah. So after that, thoughts on the big three. Let me see. I liked how well they kind of like complemented one another.
That's a good point.
Yeah, like I mean, like Ron Weasley, he had of course it's really gonna show how well they complement each other at the towards the part with the Devil Snare and the chess match and the potion vials. It's gonna show that really well, but they also do that like all throughout the entire books. They're complementing each other. Like Hermione is just Hermione. I've called her Hermione since like.
Dude, I did the same when I read the books before the movies. It was Hermione all the way.
Yeah,
weird name.
It's like, yeah, no, and I still catch myself calling her that. But yeah, no. So like, so Hermione, was just this wealth of knowledge, and then Ron was there, and Ron was a great source of comic relief for some of the parts, but he also like had his roles to play. Like, Ron is like the ultimate ride or die friend, especially in the part with the chess match. Like Henry said, he's like, hey, I'm about to get smacked by this queen. But you go here and you'll be fine. but yeah, and then there's Harry, who's and then there's Harry who basically has to pick up the torch, and Harry has to make it all the way to the end, and that's where Harry's needed, of course. Like if it had been one of the other three at the very end of that end of that end of that those rooms, like at the mirror, then one of the other two, like they would not have been able to defeat Coral. Like it was Harry was needed for that.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
But yeah,
I think it's I think you touched on it. Well, everybody sort of touched on it, but like just how the complement of each other because of their personalities that kind of Rowling wrote for them and their just attributes and their characteristics, all that kind of stuff. And it is interesting. Like I think you were saying, Daniel, it's like it does develop. You see little snippets of it. Like they're on the train, and obviously Harry and Ron are getting along pretty well. But then Hermione comes in and she's already a bit of a wealth of knowledge type deal, and she can fix Harry's glasses. So it's like there's, that kind of works. And then, you progress to the Halloween when the bathroom scene with the mountain troll and everything. And it's like, oh my gosh, they figured it out together, more Harry and Ron than anything else. But, she, in the same way that when Harry chooses Ron over Malfoy on the stairs before the sorting happens, which provide like Ron is just like, okay, awesome, he's my boy, we're in this together. In that same way, the bathroom scene kind of does the same with Hermione, because she was in there, she was sobbing and getting all upset because of Ron and because of how both in the book and in the movie they were being kind of dickish to her and just but it is interesting how Harry is very brave and he's very talented and he has all that raw potential, but he has no training and he has absolutely no back kind of, retroactive knowledge of the world he now exists in. Whereas Ron has all the knowledge of the world and just like kind of how it operates and things like that. And he's also very brave and strong and stuff, but he's not very, I don't want to say smart because he's clearly a very smart person, but he's kind of lazy.
He's street smart.
He is very street smart. Yeah, he's kind of lazy. He, not exactly the best people person because he's always, they talk about him being like taller than Harry and stuff, and he's more of a bruiser than he is like actual, friendly type personality. And that could be partially because he was bullied by his five older brothers. Yeah, 5 because Ginny's the 7th beneath him. Yeah, so I mean, kind of that personality. But then you have Hermione, and she's like, incredibly intelligent, applies herself magnificently, but she's kind of a know-it-all. She's very, very bossy, and that kind of puts off people, which is why, oddly enough, when Harry and Ron feel bad about, what Ron said, and they realize, oh crap, the trolls and roaming around, we got to go find her and stuff. The Force doesn't exist in this franchise, obviously, but it is kind of one of those like manifest destiny type things where they all like, they appear at the same spot at the same time, and it just like all happens to work out. And that was one of the flashpoints culminating in this film with kind of the crucible they go through, almost like the arcade tower where it's like pass the dog, then beat the plant, and then beat the, just on and on and on. So yeah, I mean, again, casting was great. I thought the execution was good. I liked the dialogue and everything. I think some of the flourishes they put in there, like, Ron always being like, bloody hell and stuff like that. That was very entertaining. But yeah, I think it's a very charming group. Very, I mean, you touch on like this stuff about like the attractiveness quality. It's like, yes, I see that to a certain extent because some of the other kids, like I think about Marcus Flint on the Slytherin Quidditch team and just how effed up his teeth are. And it's just like, okay, he's obviously, he's obviously a tool. We don't like him. But in some extent, because they're so like warm and cuddly looking as these like 11-year-olds, I think that just really it makes the audience feel comfortable with who they are and is much more easily accepted and able to, clamp on rather than if you had, the kid who played Neville play Harry or something like that, for example. But any final points on the big three before we move on?
I'm actually really glad that you guys all brought up just like the bravery of Harry in particular, because it's like I feel like with a lot of franchises like this, when you get behind one hero, you kind of have to see why you follow that hero. And I think it just goes back to like he always tries to do the right thing, which I think might flow in from his like parents, like father, like son, like mother, like son. But just throughout the three movies, Harry and Hermione and Ron follow him, and he always looks out for their better interests. And I don't know. I love the almost stupidly optimistic characters in franchises like this, because it's like when you're going against impossible odds, you just kind of need that. And you see it in movies, whether it's like Samwise Gamgee or it's Goku or it's Luke Skywalker. It's just like you need that optimism at the end of the day. And like I think that's what I love about this film in particular is like you kind of need that in today's world. We needed it back then because not to bring this up, but this movie was released only a few months before 9/11, and then even after. Like, I remember you guys remember that, where it's just like the world was a very confusing place at the time. And I got the VHS tape a few months after that. And it was just, we needed that escapism. We needed that hope at the end of the day. That's why it's so important to write characters like Harry.
For sure. Films are tremendous for escapism, but I think again, these characters, they're so easy to root for. They're so likable and everything, and they have a great moral North Star in Harry's personality and everything, but they are like flawed characters, which makes them even more interesting. And the last thing I'll say before we move on is like, it's funny you bring up the optimism, because it's interesting to track how that optimism gets tested constantly throughout the franchise, and how it wanes and wanes and wanes until literally like the last 10 minutes of Deathly Hallows Part 2. So it's a very interesting concept as that develops. So here we go. This would be a fun one. Do you who did we start on last? Austin? I think this goes to Henry first. Mm-hmm. Do you like the mixture of drama, horror, and comedy in this film? And would you have liked to see more of one tone over the others? And kind of where would you have liked to see that if you wanted to swap it up somehow?
So you said comedy, horror, and drama?
Those are the three tones that stand out to me the most, and just like style of movie. But what are your thoughts on it?
I think there was plenty of horror in this movie. I slept with the lights on for quite a while, not just from the Voldemort scene that we had talked about before, but also the scene where they're out in the woods and you just see Voldemort, like Daniel said earlier, eating the unicorn. Like it's terrifying. I think comedy was lightly used, and I just always liked the little quirks that the three of them had, like the three main people we were just talking about. Like, I love it when Ron is funny. I love it when him and Hermione kind of bicker at each other. And I think that's another reason, like, I know J.K. Rowling has come out recently and said, like, I don't think Ron and Hermione should have gotten together. The movie certainly did not agree with that statement, because they're just so different, but they're so perfect for each other. And but at least in these early stages of it, to see the relationship of like they're just picking on each other. And I would have liked to see like a little bit more of that. Like, I think some of the fewer comedy aspects we got was like with Hagrid being like, oh, well, I shouldn't have told you that because, well, now you're going to die. But, and I certainly think there was enough jumps. I probably could have done with a little bit more humor in it, but I still wouldn't change too much.
It's also interesting. It's like the British humor sensibilities is much more dry than what you would think of like American, like sort of slapstick and like really over the top to like, this is funny, right? It's like, it's more just like conversational and more situational, which I always appreciate in almost any type of like British cinema. But Daniel, what do you think?
I thought the mix was pretty damn close to perfect. Yeah, there was like, I'm not a huge horror fan, and they definitely had those like horror parts, like the going back to the part forest unicorn Voldemort. No,
right.
Like never again.
Especially not as a 10-year-old in the theaters, you know.
Yeah, no, like I can barely do that now. But-
And you're in the military.
It's like, formerly in the military.
Snaps for Daniel.
But yeah, so but they had just enough, it's just enough it's like adding spice to food. You don't want too much, otherwise you can't taste your food. And I don't like my food very spicy.
Unless
like
Bo was here.
Very horror-y. Horror film. That makes much more sense.
Loud and clear. We got you.
Yeah. So I really liked the mixture. If there was anything that I could have seen differently, it might have been the comedy. But again, I really have no complaints.
Even now, like some of the comedy still lands for me. Like I'm just like that nerd who sits there like to myself, like when she needs to sort out her priorities, things like that. But yeah, Austin, what do you think about that?
Yeah, just real quick, I'll say I kind of do like the underhanded comments that like some characters will give to others, or like the little comments that they give to themselves. Like again, famously with Hagrid, I shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that. It's just I remember laughing that as a kid, and I still remember laughing at that as an adult now. I'm really happy with the amount of horror that did make it into the film, because at the end of the day, it's not a horror film at all. Mm-hmm. But I think just the amount of scenes and the amount of time we get with those horror elements, I think is just perfect, because we have to build tension. We have to establish Voldemort as a real threat, even though Voldemort isn't in his like true physical form that we will later see. Comedy, I touched on it a little bit, but it's just like, I'm glad there wasn't an overuse of physical comedy, kind of like you mentioned, Spencer. I can't stand it. And like shows like that you see on like Nickelodeon have like a lot of forced humor and afford a lot of like forced laughter, which is just like, okay, I'm supposed to laugh here, but it wasn't funny. It's just like a really stale joke or a real stale like comment was made. And it's just like, but that wasn't funny and I'm being told to. I like laughing on my own terms.
Right. And I think it's very impressive how Christopher Columbus and the entire crew were able to really thread that needle of, I asked this question kind of knowingly in my own sense of like, I think it was pretty well balanced across the board and everything. And I think, the comedy is needed because there are pretty significant drama and horror aspects to this, in the sense that, the horror elements, whether it's Voldemort killing Harry's mom, because you don't see him kill James, you just see him kill his mom and point it at him, and then the unicorn blood thing, and then the whole final confrontation with Quirrell and all that. And even, well, no, I guess I already said the unicorn. That is the Dark Forest part. But, that really gives the film stakes. It really ups the ante. And I think to Austin's point, if you go too hard with the slapstick style comedy, which I don't think they would have done regardless, but if you amplify that level of things, it kind of brings the stakes down a bit, and it makes like I think as an adult watching it now through the lens of an adult and everything, I think it probably takes you out of it a bit more. It makes it seem like there's a word one of my favorite YouTube film reviewers uses a lot. It's called verisimilitude. And basically it's the concept of a film being like seeming tangible, like it could exist in the real world. There's a sense of realism to it. And this movie, I think it is fantastical, all that kind of stuff, but it is presented in such a way that I could believe this was real. It is presented in that way. There's nothing outside of the rules they present and all that seems like, no, there's no way. Like, it's not I don't know, you take your pick of some of these films, like, I can't even think of some off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, just like really over the top. There is like this, the world feels lived in. It feels authentic. It feels like if it existed, like I said, you could reach out and touch it. You could go visit these places. It's that well developed. So I think if you were to, bring in more humor, or even bring down the humor to the point where it's just drama, it either becomes not great for the kids or it becomes not great for the adults. And either way, I think they would have lost. So I think it's kind of amazing how not just this movie, but any movie can really thread those kind of like, tones like going from one to the other and some layered on top. I think it's very interesting. But
yeah, it's kind of interesting to see the contrast between this movie, again directed by Christopher Columbus, who just came off of the success of Home Alone, where that movie is slapstick front to back.
Didn't he do the Goonies? I think was he the Goonies? I can't remember.
Did he?
I don't know.
I can't remember off the top of my head. I want to say he was, but yeah. All right, so and I'm sorry, I keep asking this. Who started the last one?
Dang me.
You started last. I think you're right. Daniel, what are some of the elements of foreshadowing that you most appreciate that occur in this first installment?
So, the elements of foreshadowing that I most appreciate are actually like kind of the small ones. Honestly, my favorite one was so you know how Dumbledore has this like, you know, huge sweet tooth, like he's sitting there like, you know, popping lemon drops
yes
in his mouth, and it turns out that later on to his the password like the password to his office is like sherbet lemon.
Yeah.
And I always appreciate like small ones like that. But other ones, you know, also going back with Dumbledore, the frog, the card, the card with Dumbledore on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that had a few of them that were actually fairly far-reaching throughout the books.
Yeah, specifically with Nicholas Flamel being in that card, and that's how they realize, oh, that's where I read that before.
Yep. And let me see. Also, I think for me the biggest one that like I looked back on after the book was reading about how Quirrell was always muttering to himself. It's like, oh, he's talking to Voldemort.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When Harry he's outside the office and he's like, oh, I'm pretty sure Snape was just in there, but he was not just in there, kind of thing.
It's like, yeah. But yeah, as far as foreshadowing goes, you know, the small funny ones like Sherbet Lemon and Quirrell. Basically everything that Quirrell did.
Good picks. What about you, Austin?
Yeah, I think mine are a bit more well established, but there is one that I actually just realized today was a line given by McGonagall when Harry and Ron are late to their first class, and she says, "Well, perhaps you can use a map." And I think it's pretty funny how they end up, or Harry ends up with the Marauders map in the third movie. I don't know if that's necessarily considered foreshadowing. I just kind of like that like connection that I saw it on a YouTube video, so I can't take credit for it, but it is a very like subtle but interesting connection that someone was able to make. The only other two that really come to mind, because I haven't seen the movie in a while, I thought when the callback to the Philosopher's Stone that eventually comes into play in Deathly Hallows Part 2 with I Open at the Close with the Snitch and the Resurrection Stone, I think it's really interesting that Harry caught the snitch in his mouth in the first Quidditch game that he ever played. And Hermione, I think it's Hermione, who says that the snitch has flesh memories.
Yep.
And well, it's nice that continuity, you know, whoever was hired to do that was on set that day, because that's just an interesting little, like, they could have like easily said like Harry could have held it and be like, oh, I open at the close. Well, I'm about to die. But it's like, no, it's just, okay, I caught it in my mouth. Let me put it up to my lips. And okay, that works. Because the whole movie, part 1 and part 2, it's not a big plot element or anything, but like he does like wonder what that is, and you see him like kind of just playing with the snitch every now and then. And then also I thought you never really realize how big of a deal the invisibility cloak will come into play later throughout the franchise.
That was gonna be one of mine.
It's just like at the time you don't know about the Deathly Hallows or anything. You just think like, okay, so Harry's dad had this like badass cloak that he used to like, you know, do whatever you might want to do with an invisibility cloak.
Well, and Ron even says like, oh, they're so rare and stuff, but it leads me to believe it's like, well, how rare are they? This one seems like the one. Are there multiple?
I think there are, because again, if Ron hadn't said that, then it'd be like, whoa, I've never heard one of those before.
Yeah, it can't be too terribly. Well, it's funny too because there's a line in the book where Dumbledore's like, "Well, I don't need a cloak to be invisible." So it is, yeah.
Yeah, those are the only real ones that stood out to me. Just I like the callbacks from like way back to the first movie that still play a role at the end of the entire series.
Yeah, those are great picks. Henry, what do you think?
Well, side note, Chris Columbus wrote the screenplay for The Goonies. It was produced by Steven Spielberg and directed by Richard Donner.
Oh, okay.
But still, fantastic film. Second, I actually, like, when it comes to callbacks and things like that, like, it's one of those things where with Harry Potter especially, I felt like a lot more for me slipped through the cracks, so I don't really have as much because as a franchise, past reading the books, there was so much in between, and I know there was like extended lore, and so I don't actually think I have any.
No worries.
I'm sure as I watch them, more will come.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's funny how once you watch it all the way through and like, over the span of like a week or so, and then you watch it again shortly thereafter, it's crazy what things you'll pick up. One that just popped into my mind and one that I actually planned for this specific topic. The one I planned for it is Seamus Finnegan being a pyrotechnic and just how that carries on. And like by the seventh, like you were talking about us, it's like one of those through lines. It's like he blows up the bridge at the end. Like he is the one who, basically curtails Voldemort's army being able to cross there. I want to say most of them were werewolves and stuff in that part of the army.
Snatchers.
Snatchers, yes. That's right.
And McGonagall, again, is the one who throws the line where, like, I'm sure you can consult with Mr. Finnegan.
Yes.
He has, like,
he's just like,
ooh. Yeah. Like, he has a knowledge of pyrotechnics or whatever it was.
Definitely. And so that one, but then the other one that just popped in my head, and it almost plays with that one because he was involved with that same exact scene in Deathly Hallows, is Neville being courageous, and how at the beginning he's just like totally inept at just about everything. But especially I would say around Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore's army is happening, and especially in Deathly Hallows Part 2, I mean, like Kevin said last week, he is a Gryffindor through and through, and Gryffindors lots of times are measured by, their courageousness and their bravery. And I think even though the Sorting Hat, like, he wasn't always convinced, like, oh, why did I get put in here and stuff like that? Why wasn't he put in Hufflepuff, which is more, I think, kind of the goofy crowd, I guess you could say in some ways. He was put in Gryffindor because he had the capacity and the ability to grow into this very courageous character who was just really, really cool to see. And that line Dumbledore says at the end when he's doling out the last minute points, and he's just like, it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to your enemies, but it takes a great deal more to stand up to your friends. And I think that is like some of the deepest, truest knowledge that a movie could drop on you, and it's 100% true. It's like speaking truth to people you love is not only critically important, but it's hard and sometimes a terrifying thing to do, and he did it. So kudos to him. But that foreshadowing, I think, is pretty excellent, just knowing where he ends up. So
actually,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No,
I wanted to, like, just the character of Neville in itself. Like, I think my biggest, like, I wouldn't say regret, because I didn't do it, but like the one thing about the movie, especially with Neville's character, is I wish so hard that he was a part of the main group, like as the fourth wheel, because his role in these movies, like we talk about like Ron being like this hard ride or die guy for Harry, Neville's right there with them the whole time. And if anything, it seemed like he was Hermione's first friend. And even throughout the movies, he's constantly by Hermione's side, even though like it seems like most of the guys were sticking together and the girls like didn't really want anything to do with Hermione, but like Neville was always there for her. And they always kind of wrote him off as like the dorky kid. And but by the end of it, like I feel like, at least in the movies, like the portrayal was there that he is a hero. It seemed like from the other characters in the movie, they didn't realize it. Like we, the audience, realizes it, but sometimes I just felt like the other characters didn't as much. Do you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. And sorry to cut you off. I just, off the top of my head, and again, I'm sorry to keep bringing up the books because we're trying to talk about the movie here, but he really is involved with the core three a lot more. He is that like silent fourth musketeer type deal where when they go out of their room and they end up seeing Fluffy in the trapdoor for the first time, he's with them. And similarly, Ron, during the whole like Norbert process and everything, it doesn't end as quickly as it does in the movie. Neville actually went out to try and warn them one night when they're sneaking up trying to give Norbert to Charlie's friends up in the tower. Neville sneaks out, tries to warn them, and he's actually the fourth person who's out in the woods with Harry, Hermione, and Draco during detention because Ron actually got bit by Norbert and was in the hospital wing at the time. So there is, in the book, there's a more logical kind of solidified progression so that when he does step up to them, he's like, you guys have lost us so many points. I can't let you do this anymore. I've tried to ride with you guys, but you got to stop this stuff as they're heading out to the, to go through the trapdoor. So, those are just my thoughts, but go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, that was just, I wanted to add to this, Neville and his role, especially in the movies. He's one of the two characters, the other actually being Draco, where I feel like the movies just definitely shafted them to some degree. I agree with Neville's arc and I approve of it. It's just, I really think the movies should have spent a little more time with Neville and kind of had his like progression a little more pre-established, before Order of the Phoenix, where he really starts taking on more of like, not necessarily a leadership role, but a more confident role in himself. Because to me, it always came off as a little abrupt that all of a sudden he is this kind of courageous leader, especially after Harry is no longer attending Hogwarts by the 7th book. So it is a little abrupt in my opinion, although I agree it does make logistical sense. I really do wish we had just spent more film time with Neville. He didn't necessarily have to be, as a part of the group all the time, like have 4 main protagonists. It's just, he is kind of written off as the comic relief, I believe, especially in the first movie.
Yeah, and I think it kind of,
agree,
well, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week a little bit. It's just like, there's only so much you can fit into a 2 to 2.5 hour film. So it becomes this like, whether it's the editing floor, whether it's them making these, script changes before the film shot or what have you, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing. It's like you add more Neville, you add more Draco. Well, then where do you cut it? If your mandate is that it's only a 2 to 2.5 hour, it's just, it's an interesting conversation. Go ahead. No, you're fine.
Well, also what I remember noticing as a kid is that it's similar to the Joker movie that just came out. There's no scene in the first 3. Nope, just the first 2. There's no scene without Daniel Radcliffe other than that opening scene in Sorcerer's Stone where Hagrid flies in. There's not a single scene without Harry, and I think that was a theme that even though in the later movies they detracted and they actually had scenes was like, here's just Ron, here's just Snape walking into the Lucius mansion or whatever it was. But like for those first 2 movies, Daniel Radcliffe is in every single scene, and maybe that was just something they were trying to do in the first 2. I'm not really sure.
It's entirely possible. And I think you might have touched on something. It's like we were talking about how the first 2, I think Austin was talking about it last week, they really do introduce you to the world and they establish the world. And I think because Harry is very much the avatar through which we are experiencing everything, we're seeing everything through his eyes and like reacting to it in real time with him. I think that's probably why is like they had to really sell that he's the main character, that he's an interesting character and everything. But like, say you went to like, and you just had scenes where like Dumbledore's just talking to McGonagall about like, I see a lot of room had they done it differently to potentially spoil things that you didn't want spoiled this early on. You really wanted there to be a lot of mystery around some of these other characters, but maybe that's my take. So moving right along, just to keep us going, this should be fun. Austin, who are some of your favorite B characters that appear in this film and why? And I want to define that as not the big 3, not Hagrid, and not Dumbledore. Anybody else is fair game. Who are the best some of your favorite characters, not necessarily the performances, but like the actual characters themselves.
Yeah, I would say it's hard to judge anyone else's performance only because like the movie is so well focused on, the main three, and then I suppose Hagrid as well. As far as my favorites, just personally, I really don't know. That's simply because like no one is really established in this film at this point. But like if I had to pick, I really.
We're gonna pass on you for now, Henry. What do you think
Yeah.
about B characters?
Well, I definitely have to give it to the professors. It sounds like a very weird thing, but like, so I've never been good. It's like when you try to reflect on the Jedi Council members that are not ever mentioned in the movies, and you're like, that's Yodorall Poof, but you remember it because of a board game, not because of like the movie itself.
Because we were like, who is the guy with the giant penis neck? We gotta go look this up.
Yeah, and like with like I can't remember. I think it might be like the guy who teaches levitation, like just
Flitwick. Yep.
Yeah, Flitwick, and how he's like one of the wizard things is levitation, and I think he might be. I know that like Warwick Davis plays like 5 characters.
I think that is him. Yep.
And also like another professor, I can't remember, the teacher who teaches them how to fly,
Madam Hooch.
Madam Hooch.
And when she does this straight up like dive when Neville's barreling towards her, that was one of my favorite scenes. And she just like dip sets out of the way. One of the best like body comedy scenes in the whole movie. It's very quick and sudden, but it just made me laugh. I want a nice clean game from all of you. We'll give Henry a second to recover. Daniel, how about some of your favorite B characters?
See, Professor McGonagall was probably one of my favorite ones. And the one scene where I determined that was right after Harry, Ron, and Hermione beat the troll in the women's lavatory. Like she comes in, her wand's raised, she sees the 3 of them, she sees the troll on the ground, and like her immediate facial expression is, these kids are gonna make my life a living hell.
These are legit.
Oh man.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think McGonagall is probably my favorite. I wouldn't even. It's tough because she borders. She's on that line between A and B characters. But what they established with her just being the deputy headmistress and everything, I think is fantastic. Same thing with Snape. I guess really, yeah. The professors are probably the big standouts. I think Fred and George are pretty interesting. I like Oliver Wood. He was pretty interesting as a B character. There's not a whole lot beyond them per se. I mean, you could argue Neville and Seamus are B characters.
Yeah, another pick of mine is Fluffy, just because I'm for dogs.
Fluffy.
That's a great call.
What?
Justice for Fluffy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just so like Spencer, you kind of mentioned this, like the other classmates, like you have Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, Neville Longbottom, like the guys who were just kind of always there but never really have a role.
Right.
But like one thing I mentioned in our last talk was that like I feel like everyone was just cast perfectly and like every performance was so well done. That's why it's so hard for me to really like narrow down like this person stands out to me to most.
Mm-hmm.
If I did have to pick one, if I really did, I guess it would have to be Quirrell, I guess. And I know we were talking about like not necessarily like performance, but it is just like his performance, I think, where it's just like,
well, and his turn at the end too, he goes from like, and it's the same on the page and on the screen, where it's like he goes from being the stuttering little kind of a dipshit in some ways to like he's legit terrifying. Like not even the Voldemort side of him, the Quirrell side of him is like the Führer, and just like he's very unstable in his own right.
Right. He just really starts to be a like commanding force, especially where you're like, "Come here, Potter, now," and you're like, "Oh man,
Tell
like,
the truth."
Well, I also like to say, I think Quirrell was like our first introduction to like how those Death Eaters were very like snake-like, and like where it's like, "Come here, Potter, now!" Like that enunciation of words and stuff.
I was gonna say that's not even like a. It's not a question per se, but yeah, all the people we're meant to not like when they pronounce or their diction of the word Potter is like Potter, like it sounds like John Gruden calling a play when they're in the pistol formation. It's like Potter. But
Don't
yeah,
ever mention Madam Hooch's barrel diving.
yeah, and Hooch only shows up one more time, I think, and then I don't think we ever see her again, which is just sad because I thought, she just her visual, and I don't know if it's just because of her gray hair or whatever, but she also has like the really like piercing like golden eyes and everything. There's like one semi close up of her when she's giving them their first flying lesson, and just like she just looked like a very interesting character. But I mean, outside of that, you're meant to hate them, but I think the Dursleys are a character that's just so important, and whether it is on the page or on the screen, I think especially in the movie, I think they were done in such a way that like if Vernon Dursley came and tried to bully any other grown human being, people would laugh at him because he's like this giant obese d-bag, and nobody really likes him. But as far as the characters themselves, I don't know, I find them interesting in like their relation to Harry, and how we talked about it in extensively earlier, but I think they're
right. And I actually want to retract my statement, because if we're considering the Dursleys as like the B-list characters in it, then I would definitely have to pick one of the three. It would probably be Vernon, only because just like watching him, he's just like laughably, just like not evil, but he's just like laughably, he's just horrible. Like you can tell how horrible, and that's one thing I always appreciated. That is just like these people are just so terrible, and it's like not just to Harry. Like even in the books, I know like Dudley bullies everybody.
they spell out his day, like the day that Harry got dropped off to their house, like it's from Vernon's point of view for like almost a full chapter, and it's just like, yeah, I went to work, I yelled at people, it was a good day. Like that. He's a dick, but he's an oafish dick, so it's kind of funny to watch him. And same thing with like we were talking about comedy sections earlier, and it's like I laugh my ass off when the lady who plays Petunia, when Dudley gets stuck in the boa constrictor exhibit, and then like the glass reappears and she's like freaking. I think that is hilarious to watch, just her performance.
Also with
one of my favorite lines was always "No post on Sundays." Ha!
No post on Sundays.
But that like honk that he gives is just like perfection.
Also with like these performances, like it always makes me think of Tom Felton as Draco, because even as a young actor through like the later movies, like I think he is just like Emma Watson, where he played his character too well. Because like fast forward to like I think it was Rise of the Planet of the Apes, he's still Draco Malfoy.
Yeah, or when he's on The Flash. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's unfortunate in some aspects in that, just to touch on that real quick, it's like it's unfortunate because you see them as kids in these roles, and then you literally spend the next decade, or pretty much the whole next decade in real world, growing with them, watching them grow in their performances and how they like the details and kind of the subtext of their performance. It's hard not to. It's like kind of like, for me at least, watching Hugh Jackman as Wolverine for the better part of 15 years. He can be in The Greatest Showman, he can be in Swordfish, he can be in a number of other things, but he's always going to be Wolverine when I see him on screen. But all right, this one goes to Henry first. Do you think Chris Columbus did a good job with the inception of this franchise, and do you have any criticisms of his direction?
I think he did fantastic for bringing us into this world. I also think that, given his career with the Home Alone films, like Austin had mentioned, is he knows how to capture that childlike innocence, and I think that innocence is the viewer or the reader in the books. Like we are all Harry Potter, because as he's going through these things on screen, we're going through it with him. So he captured that completely. And like, not to bring up later works like Percy Jackson and Lightning Thief, also a Chris Columbus movie, like in a film like that where you feel like you're not so much on it, like there wasn't enough reason sometimes for us to like feel drawn to the story. But with Harry Potter, I just think he knocked it completely out of the ballpark. I think the only thing I would have critiqued is, I can't remember who said it, but about like Harry learning magic, performing more spells. I think my biggest criticism of this film is he's more of a spectator, and understandably so, because he's in this world. Even when Snape's like, tell me, what does it take to blah, blah, blah. And he's just like, I don't know. But like Hermione knows, and like, you have Ron Weasley and then that other kid that blew the feather up in his face. Like they're all performing magic, trying magic. Harry, I don't think
it's interesting too, because
spells.
like both in the film and in the book, I mean, I'm probably because they're first years, but they don't really do much magic at all. I mean, Ron and Hermione do the bulk of the magic that I can think of off the top of my head. But that's a good point. I don't know if the source material would have dictated that Harry did more magic, and I'm probably overlooking something that I'm forgetting right now. But even in the book, just from reading it recently, I don't remember him doing too much magic besides like the invisibility cloak and obviously interacting with like the Mirror of Erised and stuff like that. But Daniel, what do you think about the direction of the film? I know that you probably don't focus too much on like the the crew behind the camera and stuff like that. But I mean, any thoughts or?
See, I was actually very impressed by how well they brought the book into the world of film and cinematics. All the way from when you first see Hogwarts, and then you have John Williams like opening the opening song. Mm-hmm. From there all the way to the main hall, where they got the detail. The floating candles was what I was looking for. Yeah. They had the details in there too, details from the books. And yeah, no, I was really, when I went to the movie theater, because you're always scared, when a book you like is being brought on film, you're always scared. Yeah. When you walk in the movie theater, it's like, please be good.
Yeah, this could have very easily ended up as like the Golden Compass movie that came out years and years ago. That was just thinking, like, not great.
Aragon.
I was thinking Aragon. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a horrible adaptation.
Yeah,
which is sad because the trailer for that looks so awesome, and then the movie was just bad.
But it had a really good cast too.
Yeah, and Avatar: Last Airbender is another great example of. I mean, it's not really from a book, but
same general concept. That adaptation that just fell on its face.
Yeah, like an IP that could have gotten really big. If the movie had just done well. So the first movie, you're always like scared that like, is this going to be a one and done kind of thing? But no, they got it. They got it right where they're supposed. They got you right in the childhood feels. And yeah, sorry, go on.
Nope, I agree with what you said, Austin. What about you, man?
I think Christopher Columbus, and the shortest answer I can give, yes, I thought Christopher Columbus did a fantastic job. I appreciate the direction that he went in, and I really like, in the same way that the book kind of takes its time, so does the movie. This is the first movie in an entire franchise, so you don't need to rush to the action. You don't need to rush to any suspense. You just like take your time, establish the world that we will be viewing for the next 10 years, and now even continuing with Fantastic Beasts. But yeah, I mean, this movie could have easily flopped, and it obviously didn't. So Christopher Columbus did something right. And for the most part, I feel like he did get everything right. The casting was on point. The script, and I think it was Steve Kloves, I think is who did the screenplay. Like, that was on point. I just think like this is the movie that just everything came together perfectly, simply because it's a hangout movie that takes its time, that really just revels in like the charm and the atmosphere.
I would agree. It's like there's just, when you think about it, there's not like a whole lot of spectacle or bombast, and I mean it's inherently spectacular just based on like the world that is being inhabited, that we're visiting for the first time, and all that kind of stuff. But you know, I love watching stuff like the behind the scenes and all that kind of thing. And it's like, for I'd say most movies, you have crews and directors and stuff that are really like, no one sets out to make a bad movie. All the bad movies you can think of, it's like no one went into that project thinking, all right, this is going to be terrible and we're going to just ruin it as much as we can. Like nobody takes on any sort of creative artistic project, works on it for years, all the man hours that goes into this kind of stuff, and doesn't want it to be good. But unfortunately things happen and not all movies are good. So but I watch like the behind the scenes stuff, and you can just tell like everybody had such a commitment to excellence with this, from the set decoration to the characters to the development, the story, like everything really, you know. And I'm sure there's some people who, you know, will criticize things about it, and I get that. That's all fair points. But I mean, like, for the first foray into this world, you know, for me, it was excellent, I thought. And you know, it's interesting because obviously in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Alfonso Cuarón directs and you know, changes up a lot of the aesthetic of like the literal placement of things and kind of the general layout of Hogwarts and things like that, you still watch it, and there's tons of things that Christopher Columbus did first that still translate over into that. There's a lot of continuity that he first built, and I really appreciate that. But oh, go ahead.
I guess if any movie needed to be faithful to the source material, I think this is the one that needed to rely on that concept the most.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, I think it was executed very well. There are definitely things that I think, again, needed to be in the book. Well, not needed to be in the movie, but like, I don't know, certain parts of the book where I was like, it wouldn't have benefited, but it wouldn't have taken away either. I think Peeves is a great example, because Daniel, you brought him up last time.
Yeah.
I was never one who like really like advocated for the character, but I know his presence enough in the movie is just kind of, or excuse me, the book is kind of like, it would have been fun to have like just like a 5-second clip of like, here's Peeves, you know, but like,
well, and it would have been interesting to see Peeves in this movie, not as like a mainstay or anything, but just kind of as like again, like kind of a back of your mind presence, kind of like the Forbidden Forest, like to know that like, okay, when you're walking around the castle, like there's the potential that this poltergeist is going to pop out and start ruining your day for one reason or another, just because he's kind of a nihilist like that, I guess.
Right, but that could have gotten into like the slapstick comedy that I just said that I wasn't a fan of either. Right. So it's like the fact that it isn't there doesn't take away or really add to the movie at all. It's just like everything that was put in the movie, I understand why it's there. And then you watch some of the deleted scenes and you're like, I understand why this was cut. And
you know, it kind of gets into all the, like you were saying, you rob Peter to pay Paul, you add things, you have to cut other things out. And, you know, if you watch just this movie, you wouldn't know that there's like this big missing piece. Like, we know it because we read the books, but Peeves is not like this linchpin to the story. He's just kind of like an added thing in the books because they have more time to explore stuff like that. But you said something that I you know, wanted to touch on, and how I kind of measure whether it's a good adaptation or not is like, you read the book, you watch the movie. Are there things in the book that you would have liked to see in the movie? And the answer is not really. For me, at least, there's nothing really in the book that is like, oh my gosh, why was that not in the movie? It's not like Return of the King, where yes, that's already a 3.5-hour movie or whatever the case is. But they completely gloss over the fact that, oh, by the way, when they return from this, you know, the War of the Ring and everything, they return back to the Shire. The Shire is on fire because Saruman and Wormtongue invaded it. Like they just, that didn't happen. And that's like one of the huge things in that film specifically, that it's like, you know, I would have been nice to kind of have that, even though it was this long, ridiculously, you know, drawn out movie. And that, you know, that's fine. That was a direction choice, but I personally was like, that seemed like a missed opportunity. But this film in particular, it seemed like they took the source material and they adapted it just so well. They moved certain pieces around. They neglected to put certain things in, but nothing felt like it was missing. It tells a complete story. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and I thought it was very good in that respect. Now, Henry, top 3 performances, not characters, but your favorite 3 performances. And I think we've covered a lot, so it's not necessary to really like dwell too much on the topic, but I'm just curious who your favorite 3 were.
Definitely number 3, definitely Rupert Grint. Because he's just so consistent and I just love seeing him on screen. Number 2, Richard Harris, rest in peace. When you think a wizard, like between his performance at Ian McKellen that same year as Gandalf, like we had never seen wizards done that well ever, and I don't think we ever have ever since. And number 1, hands down, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, Ruby's Hagrid.
Yeah, Robbie Coltrane.
Yep.
Yeah, fantastic fantastic actors. All great picks. Daniel, what about you?
Let's see. Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe for one. And I can't quite remember Draco Malfoy's actor.
Tom Felton.
Say again.
Herbity Derbity. Tom Felton.
Tom Felton. There we go. Yeah. I thought that he did an amazing job portraying his character. And then, yeah, Hagrid. Like, you know, because I can, even now, I can clearly picture Hagrid, just saying, I shouldn't have said that. Shouldn't have said that. Like, for me, those 3 really nailed their roles.
Austin?
So for me, it's Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid. I think he kind of is the star of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Rupert Grint as Ron. Again, I think he's a real show stealer, especially in like the last act. Just like his ability to be able to convey all those type of emotions where he's either scared of the devil's snare or he's really taking a commanding force during the chess game. I think just the range of Rupert Grint's ability really shines. And I'm actually going to change mine because I had them written down, but I want to give a very special shout out to John Hurt as Mr. Ollivander.
Yes, I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah,
John Hurt.
He's not in my top 3 anymore, but he is a very special shout out just because I love where he's like, no, particularly not that one.
He has he has like 5 minutes of scene or, of on-screen time, and he just chews up the dialogue. Like every word there, he's like, for the brother of this wand gave you that scar.
Yeah, and it's like, how important is that scene just like throughout the rest of the series?
Great things. Terrible, but great.
Yeah, that gives you a real, like from my point of view, the Jedi are evil perspective of the wizarding world. But I'm going to change it to one of Henry's picks, Richard Harris as Dumbledore. I said it briefly in our last talk where when I'm reading the books specifically, Richard Harris is who I envision. And I've always liked kind of the more like elderly, wiser interpretation of Dumbledore, because I always saw like he's that presence at the end of the movie that is kind of like wrapping everything up for not only Harry but the viewer as well. And I do love like kind of the innocence that comes with that character and those kind of scenes, especially with the every flavor beans at the end where he's like, alas, earwax.
Earwax.
He's just a very warm presence. And like, I'm not even in this world. I'm not even an actor in this movie, but it's just like, it puts a smile on my face.
He's in it for such a short time. That just speaks to the quality of the actors and actresses they picked. Is like, a lot of them really aren't in the movie that much. But when they're in the movie, you 100% buy into what they're selling you. And I'm just, you're just eating it up.
Well, it's funny, if you go to Wikipedia right now, after the main 3, the next person on the cast list is John Cleese.
Yeah. John Cleese, we didn't even bring him up. He has a tremendous cameo, and not even a cameo. He is a character, but like he's in for like literally 2 sections of the whole entire film for like very brief seconds, and he made an impression on me. But maybe that's just because I'm a huge Monty Python
forgive
fan.
Forgive me. Who is that?
Nearly Headless Nick.
Okay.
But yeah. So I think all you guys had tremendous picks, and it's hard not to bring up the big 3 because they literally are the heart and soul of this film for the most part, and we spend the most time with them, and I think they're tremendous. But I think the ones that I gravitate towards, in no particular order, Rubius Hagrid. I mean, he literally, maybe it's just because he's larger than life, and because he's just, I don't know, such a cuddly, like warm character, and for the same reasons, Albus Dumbledore, Richard Harris is him. I think, like Austin was saying last week, he's who I envision a lot of times when I'm reading or thinking about the character of Dumbledore. It's the Richard Harris version. And again, you guys brought up so many good ones. I think of people like Vernon Dursley's actor. I mean, he is an a-hole in the film and in the books and everything, but the actor plays his performance just in such a way that like it's fun to watch. Very similar to how Umbridge is. Like, you really hate her, but her actress really brings out exactly what that character was. Ollivander's a great pick, but I have to. My favorite will be Alan Rickman as Snape. I mean, he's so good. I mean, in every single movie, not even just this one. I mean, like everyone he brings, but this one specifically. And we touched on it, that first scene where they're in the potions class and he just like kicks the door in and is just like, put your shit away, we're doing this now. Like, I love it. And just, of course, like his slow delivery, and he's again just chewing up the dialogue, but that like he's like almost like gritted teeth, and you think of like how they describe like looking down his crooked nose at everybody, and it's like that's exactly the character I thought when I was reading it was Alan Rickman. So
I'm so glad you brought him up, because I was watching the behind the scenes of Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Tony Jaa, who played Frollo, said something about how like if you're in like an actor's dream is a chance at immortality, and people would like compare it to like these Disney films where like if you're to voice one of these iconic characters, you're going to live on forever. And this was like around the time where it's like where these big franchises were making it. And like when Alan Rickman passed away, everybody was posting Snape memes. Everybody was going back and watching their favorite Snape moments. And I don't think out of all the portrayals, anyone goes back on a specific actor more than his version of Snape. And I remember at the bookstores, there would be these big like illustrations of Snape, like looking over Harry. And I think he might be the most on point to what J.K. Rowling originally visioned.
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit last week about like, of course he was the only person who knew about his backstory and all that kind of stuff. So being able to take that sort of knowledge and use that to benefit the character portrayal and all that kind of stuff, I think is just, amazing. And I'm so, so thankful that he was able to finish all 8 films before his untimely passing, because I mean, you can't not have Snape in those films. And what a shame it would have been. Like, we totally dodged a bullet. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, he passed away and it's a terrible thing, but like, I'm just so thankful that we got the time that we had with him. Especially just being able to finish out the arc of that character. It was just, so great. But I want to finish this episode by asking a quick and hopefully very fun question: is if you could, because obviously the Sorting Hat dictates that you can actually have some say in which house you want to be in. Which house would you want to have been in and why? And I will start. I would have been a Gryffindor. And not to just be on the bandwagon, because I know they're kind of like the Patriots dynasty, or like being on the MJ's Bulls in the 90s or something like that. But it's just, I think whether it was through the books or through everything else, everything I know about all 4 houses, I would have totally been a Gryffindor. And Daniel, why don't you take it from there?
So years ago, I would have been right there with you in Gryffindor. Nowadays, though, I had to retake a test. I did this a couple weeks ago. I took a test again to see where I was. Nowadays, I'm a Hufflepuff. Just because.
I can see that.
Yeah, just because I'm not.
Just because of the name. I mean, alone. No,
it's like, yeah, no, I'm like a lot. Like I had a lot of the qualities of Hufflepuff. Even back then, but there with Gryffindor, there's always this sense of like bravery to the point of brashness or recklessness. And as I've gotten older, I don't take the same risks that I used to. So yeah, Hufflepuff.
I'm very curious before we go too far on. Well, why don't you? Oh, here we go. Sorry. Yeah, so that makes sense. So Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal, those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. I think that fits pretty well, right? Seems like you. Why not? Go ahead, Austin. What do you think?
Well, according to Pottermore, at least, I am a Gryffindor. I took the test, it was years ago. But I've always thought, not to, I guess, toot my own horn here, but I always thought I do have qualities that would, reflect that of a Gryffindor. I kind of pride myself on being very loyal to a good cause or, to my friends. And, I'm always someone, especially like later in life, now that I've gotten older, who's not afraid to really take the big risks or will welcome a new challenge in life and try to succeed in the end. So of who I am as of today, I would consider myself a Gryffindor. I don't think that's ever really changed.
I can totally see it. I can see you in your what is it, the red and yellow scarf with your robes on and everything. I totally see it. And at the risk of repeating a joke from earlier, Henry, which house do you think you would have been in, and why is it Slytherin?
Well, it's funny you said that because I was totally going to pick Slytherin, and I think the reason why is because like Gryffindor, I think as far as my belief system, like I believe in basic human morality from like a very classical standpoint. Like I believe in just simply treating people the way you want to be treated. So like natural, and I feel like showing bravery in the face of adversity is definitely a Gryffindor trait. However, my whole mind, and this isn't relative to this film, but my whole perspective changed because I actually hadn't read the Deathly Hallows by the time I saw part 2. And at the very end, where Harry says to his son, he's like, "What if I get picked in Slytherin?" He's like, one of the men you were named after was a Slytherin. He was the single bravest man I knew. And I think that's what I love about Slytherin is that you don't really know. Like I know most people associate with, Draco Malfoy, Lucius Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, but it's like at the same time though, like even like Snape or even like Draco, it's like you think you have them figured out and you think that they're just the bad guys. But in reality, Draco was a good guy. He was just growing up like the rest of us. He was just misunderstood. I mean, yeah, he was a rich, spoiled kid, but
he was raised by Death Eaters who had lied about the fact that they were under, some sort of, what is the Ignatius curse? They lied basically about the fact that they were possessed the whole time and just re-entered society, but still held those very toxic beliefs about, pure blood and stuff like that. So he was basically raised by, wizard Nazis. And so it's hard to, from a place of huge privilege in that community, it's hard to kind of separate yourself from that. And it did take the entire events of the entire franchise to really break him from that.
Yeah. And I think that like by the time we finally got to the end of that final film, which I have to go back and read that book, but like just knowing that like Snape, he was a good guy. He was also a deliverer, which is kind of how like I feel like I'm not the master schemer, but I feel like I'm excellent at being a right hand man and getting things done. And that's exactly what Snape was to Dumbledore. And seeing how he knew that ultimately like Harry was going to have to die at some point because he's a Horcrux, and he was just like questioning, but at the end of the day, he was still very loyal to Dumbledore, and he did everything he asked him to, even though he knew in the end he was going to lose everything, including his life, including Harry's mom, who he cared for really deeply. And I think it was really commendable for that. I was like, you know what, I might be a Slytherin.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as much as people like, well, I think it was Ron who said like there isn't a witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin kind of thing. It's like, be that as it may, Slytherin is also, still one of the 4 houses of Hogwarts, and if they were just sorted into this house and determined to be evil because of the qualities of their personalities and their character and stuff like that, they would have been removed from Hogwarts as a household years and years prior. I would assume they would have put a kibosh on that almost immediately. So it's like being a Slytherin doesn't necessarily dictate your future or who you are. And I think you said it, Snape is the best example of that. It's like you could be a Voldemort, you could be a Snape. Hopefully you'll be the latter.
And I even want to add into that, like one of the very last pieces of the final film where Draco Malfoy is there with his family and he looks right over at Harry and they nod at each other and they're just like, it's that mutual respect and I think that's also kind of symbolism for where we are, like even as a nation now, not to bring up like the real world, but it's like, you can be on opposing teams and have multiple disagreements like the Slytherins versus the Gryffindors. But it's like at the end of the day, they strongly they want the same thing. They want peaceful coexistence. And I think that's where they finally added, but that was also a part of the growing up journey. And I really wish they would have touched on that more in the films between the two of them. But just that nod, I'm glad we at least got that. And there was that mutual respect. And when their final battle was going down, Draco and his family was like, we're not going to be a part of this anymore. And they just turned and ran.
It's a great point, and I think we all know that if you have terrible teeth and you need a lot of dental work, you're going to Slytherin. So, anyways,
Spencer, there's one more thing. It'll take like not even 5 minutes. I just want to do like a round the table, just like give yourself a minute and just like fanboy over this movie, and I feel like that's just a good way to kind of wrap things up. So just gush for like just a minute. I'll do like counterclockwise for myself going last. So Daniel, we'll start with you.
See,
just praise the movie for a minute.
Let's see. So I've been doing that the entire time. Yeah, no,
we're not worthy.
Yeah, no. This movie took me into the world of Hogwarts in a manner that I only thought I could have reached by book, and that's high praise for me because I usually I don't usually compare the movies I watch to the books I read when it's of the same thing, but this time I sat there and movie, I'm like, yo, this. Oh man, and yeah, no, it really got me there. All right,
great, Henry.
Yeah.
Just like you said, it's like I think this movie is one of the best world building from the first film or chapter of any franchise that's ever been done in cinema. It's definitely up there at the round table of franchises, whether it's like you have Star Wars, Pirates of the Caribbean, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, like those, the MCU, like it's up there. But it was one of the first ones that did that, in everything from lovable characters, amazing performances, the lore, the music. Something we never really talked about was the costumes. Like everybody wanted that robe and the tie to go with it. Like everybody wanted that, the sports, the aesthetic, and even the British humor, which is why I was losing my shit because of the Madam Hooch tie. But just everything about it, like I think at the core of this movie, like what they tried to push was perseverance in the face of adversity, and particularly like just at the end of the day, we can't go through life alone. We need our friends. I mean, and I think that's at the core of what Harry Potter is. It's, even though it's about Harry Potter, it's really about Harry, Ron, and Hermione all together, and that's why they're on every single movie cover, the three of them together, because they're just so perfect.
Okay, Spencer.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everybody's points, and throughout the entire episode too. I think we touched on it in so many ways that just, I try to judge a piece of art not by, what what critics and people say that it should be per se, but I judge it by, did it accomplish what it set out to do? And this film, I felt, set out to introduce us to this world, introduce us to the characters, and kind of get us off on the right foot going forward, knowing full well that we had at least 6 or 7 movies that were coming after it. So this one was so critical. And again, just the time it came out was perfect for my age at the time. It wasn't something that I had seen before. It didn't feel like a retread of something else. And I felt like it really clicked on a lot of cylinders. I think it's a testament to the overall franchise that this is probably my 4th favorite film of the 8, just outside of the top 3 I listed last week. So, yeah, I mean, it's a joy to go back and watch. I love watching it. I probably memorized so many of the lines just because I've watched it so many times. And I think that's another testament, is like just the rewatchability. If it's on TV and I just need something to put on in the background, I can watch it at any point in the movie and it's enjoyable. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing else that I need out of a movie than just, infinite rewatchability, enjoyable story, and just wonderful characters that I just connect to across the board.
Yeah, and I'll basically briefly echo everything you guys have said. Like this movie, this franchise, but specifically this movie, like it gave me a wonderful movie, it gave me a wonderful game, it gave me a wonderful book, and it really did introduce me to just like what would sum up a large portion of my childhood and a large portion of my life. Like these movies I will carry with me for the rest of my life, and like I will sit down my potential children, if I may ever have any, and like we will watch Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone together. I guess one thing that we will do. So I can't give enough praise for this movie, just because it just does everything I could ever ask for it to do, as far as transporting me to a world that I just want to be in.
And I think that's a great way to end it. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. Daniel, Austin, and Henry, as always. It's just so nice to talk about stuff in this depth and with this sort of I love hearing all your perspectives and everything. Stay tuned. Next episode we are planning currently is our review of Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. That should be coming later this week. Please, if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to our channel. That would be so wonderful. Comment and let us know your opinions. I know if you've made it this far, you've probably got a lot to say, and I can't wait to hear it. I can't wait to interact with everybody. And yeah, we will see you all next time. Thanks so much.